So the primary way it's manufactured and how it's sold is as a hemp product. And the reason why that might be the case is because it can be converted from CBD. And so what a lot of manufacturers have claimed, and why they think they can sell it as hemp, is if you extract CBD from hemp and convert it to Delta-8 THC, and our laws cover Delta-9 THC alone and not Delta-8, there may be an argument that you can sell it as hemp.
Welcome to High Five with Dr. Igor Grant, Distinguished Professor of Psychiatry and Director of the Center for Medicinal Cannabis Research at UC San Diego. Each episode will take you on a fascinating journey into the evolving world of medicinal cannabis, as Dr. Grant poses 5 thought-provoking questions to his guest, uncovering their personal journey and unique contributions to the field. Now, here's your host, Dr. Igor Grant.
Okay, welcome everybody to this podcast series from the Center for Medicinal Cannabis Research at the University of California, San Diego. And today we're going to focus on Delta-8 THC. And to discuss this, I'm pleased to welcome my friend and colleague, Dr. Eric Leas, who is with the Wertheim School of Public Health at UC San Diego. Eric, welcome.
Well, thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Thanks. Before we start, do you mind just saying a little bit about yourself, your background, your research interests?
Yeah, sure. So I'm trained as an epidemiologist, and I kind of came of age during the era where lots of digital technologies were providing access to their data. So a lot of my specialty and expertise is in understanding how to analyze that data, and I primarily focus on using it to inform compliance-related actions. And so at UCSD, I run a lab where we study what vape shops sell online through e-commerce. And in relation to this podcast, that we also get to explore new products that vape shops are selling. And that gives us a window into trying to understand what's in them and how they might affect the body. And so we first started seeing Delta-8 appear in some of these shops 5 years ago, maybe a little longer now. And so that gave us like an early window into a pattern that we're seeing in this market now.
Great. Well, so let's maybe just get right into it. And following up, what is Delta-8 THC and how is it different from Delta-9 in terms of how it acts on the body or affects people?
Sure. So Delta-8 THC is a THC molecule. So THC, we normally use it as like a general encompassing term for the part of cannabis that makes you high, but it's actually a group of molecules. And so the main one that naturally occurs in cannabis is Delta-9 THC. And Delta-8 THC occurs to some extent in cannabis. It naturally occurs, but usually at an amount that's not very meaningful. But it's structurally similar to Delta-9 THC. What the 8 stands for is just a position of a carbon-carbon double bond on the THC molecule. So it's almost identical to Delta-9 THC. In terms of similarities and differences and how that affects pharmacology, there's not that much research on it. There's a number of human like subjective trials that have been done. That's the primary purpose of those, is to compare how similar or dissimilar the subjective feeling of Delta-8 is. What those find is that at around the same dose, Delta-8 is usually a little bit less psychotropic than Delta-9 THC, but in terms of the physical or the experience of the high, it's somewhat similar to Delta-9 THC. Just like I said, at the same dose, it's less. And some evidence suggests that that might be because it has a lower binding site affinity to CB1 receptors. But a lot of the products on the market anticipate this and even sell their products at a slightly higher dose. And so, for example, like a standard gummy might be sold at 25 milligrams compared to 10 milligrams, a standard dose of Delta-9.
Right. So some people have called Delta-8 THC light, or
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
sounds like that's a bit what you're saying. Well,
Yes.
so what's driven consumer demand for Delta-8? Why is it even there?
Yeah. Uh, I think there's different reasons.
Hmm.
One could, maybe we'll group these to supply side and demand side.
Okay.
So on supply side, it might stem from a result of how it can be sold and how it's manufactured.
Okay.
So the primary way it's manufactured and how it's sold is as a hemp product. And the reason why that might be the case is because it can be converted from CBD. And so what a lot of manufacturers have claimed, and why they think they can sell it as hemp, is if you extract CBD from hemp and convert it to Delta-8 THC, and our laws cover Delta-9 THC alone and not Delta-8, there may be an argument that you can sell it as hemp. And so it could therefore be sold outside of our dispensary system in California, for instance, if that legally holds up as an argument. There's also a lot of hemp excess product, including both on the cannabis system and the hemp manufactured market. So just, if you extract the Delta-9 THC out of something, out of a plant, you have leftovers that might have CBD. And if you can convert that to Delta-8 and sell it as hemp, there's an excess supply that you might be looking to derive revenue from. And any questions there on supply side?
No, it sounds like partly what you're saying is that, you know, in a way it's getting around regs
Hmm.
or regs that haven't caught up yet. And maybe we'll get into that a little bit later. And the other is that, if you've got CBD left over that you can convert into some product you can sell, that also makes sense, right? Yeah. Okay. Got it.
Yeah, and so when we're
Mm.
thinking, and this might segue a bit into regulation, there are some demand side factors as well. If it were to be able to be sold as hemp, you now might have a legal cannabis product in markets that disallow
Hmm.
marijuana. So the example that comes to mind is one of the biggest manufacturers in this market is in Indiana, where my wife happens to be from Indiana. So it's actually their headquarters are right near where her grandma lives in Indiana. Uh, and Indiana's a state where they don't even have medical use of marijuana. These people are arguing that it's so different from marijuana that we can sell it here. So consumers in those states then might be meeting their demand for marijuana by legally accessing a hemp product that achieves a comparable experience to marijuana without it being legally classified as such. Well, the other demand piece there that might make sense to have it in a legal system is if it truly is a milder psychotropic experience, there are some consumers that would like that. We don't
Hmm.
all want this high potency THC. And so on demand side, it might fulfill a demand for lower psychotropic cannabis products. Another point there that can maybe a mix of supply and demand is if you can actually do something with leftover CBD, there is a manufacturing potential there to extract the value from your leftover cannabis to convert it to other cannabinoids that might be worth exploring even in a legal market.
Yeah. All right. Interesting. You mentioned Indiana.
Hmm.
And my recollection is that isn't Eli Lilly headquartered in Indiana?
They are, yeah.
They are. And of course, historically, they were one of the early providers of cannabis Americana
Interesting.
in the early 1900s. When I give some talks, I have a picture of a bottle of this stuff, and it says cannabis and American, of course, made in the USA. We're always proud of that, and
Hmm.
and gives a number of indications for it, like as a hypnotic and analgesic, and so on and so forth.
Interesting.
not very different than what we are discovering, actually, maybe some medicinal properties. So I'm glad that Indiana continues to lead the way in this area.
Maybe we could get into some of the regulatory issues.
Yes. Okay. So before now, in the manufacturing part, are there issues then? Because I believe in order to convert CBD to Delta-8, you do have to use acids and other kinds of chemicals to do that process. Is that a concern in terms of possible safety?
Yeah, yeah. I don't know the particularities of what could go wrong, but I think the general encompassing risk is that without a standardized conversion method, you're opening up a market to where there could be impurities that are introduced. And a part of our regulatory systems have standardized extraction methods, right? So
Yeah.
I think the goal or the hope would be that we would come up with a method that would be safe if we were to sell products such as these. And a few of the markets that have moved to regulate Delta-8 have said, for now, we're pushing pause and saying we can't sell them because we don't know the safety of these conversion methods. But we're open to work with stakeholders should arrive at such a conversion method to have a standardized conversion method that would allow the products to be sold in a regulated way.
So when we talk about safety of Delta-8, it's not only the pure chemical itself and what may be the effects and side effects and so forth, but also the process of manufacturing and what else might creep into the product if it's not done correctly.
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of other safety points to consider with, putting my public health hat on.
Yeah.
If we decide that it can be sold as hemp, all of the regulations that we've promised in our regulatory systems for cannabis are now potentially moot. So things like accurate or cleared warning labels, childproof closures, standard dosing size amounts, product packaging that isn't confusing or appeals to children. So there's been a number of adverse events that have happened from companies like putting Delta-8 THC in things that look like Cheetos or popular candies among kids. So a lot of the standards that we promise in our regulated systems are not being applied in these unregulated markets. A couple of states have moved to allow it to still be sold as hemp, but then put some of these regulations in place. And so that's a start. But if we get back to, thinking of it, if it's structurally similar, pharmacologically similar to Delta-9 THC, it doesn't make a lot of sense to treat it differently from the regulations that we would apply to a psychotropic compound like Delta-9 THC.
Well, so we are talking about regulatory. That was going to be one of my follow-on questions.
Okay.
Let's get into that a little bit more. So, for example, in California, how is Delta-8 regulated as far as you know?
In California,
Because we do have a marijuana legal state. I
it's
mean, legal under,
prohibited
yeah.
in the state of California. There was an emergency provision that came into place that prohibited it from being sold in any form.
Okay, so
That
that's
was
so what?
scheduled to be, it's still up in the air what the status of that emergency regulation was removed in June, but the governor had hoped to extend it. So I don't know the current status of it, like whether that emergency status is continued, but that mirrors what a lot of other states have done that have legal recreational use markets for marijuana. For example, Colorado, it's a similar legal status in Colorado. And a lot of the reason for that is financial too. You don't want to undercut your legal market or introduce competition to that legal market for a product that isn't subject to the regulation of that market. And so it makes sense. And also it potentially deals with that competition.
So also the states where marijuana is legal don't want to lose the revenue, I assume, either from their excise taxes and such.
Yeah.
Yeah. So are you saying that from a regulatory standpoint, states that have marijuana legalized
Mhm.
have largely moved to prohibiting Delta-8, if I'm understanding you? It's the states that don't have marijuana laws, or either medical or recreational, where there could be much more of a risk, I suppose. Is that fair, or yeah?
Yeah, I would say the risk is more because of the consumer demand is much higher. So we've done a
Right.
number of studies on that. So the primary markets for these products are ones where you don't have a legal market for marijuana, but the regulators of that state have either chosen not to say anything about Delta-8 THC or have chosen to very minimally regulate it. So they've permitted it to be sold essentially without any safety standards or product manufacturing standards. So states like Florida and Texas have the biggest markets for this product, where states
Interesting.
like our own have essentially non-existent market.
Yeah. So that's very interesting. Maybe can I ask you also, well, what actually drew you to an interest in this area? I know your research covers many other things, but how did you get interested in this?
It started as a parallel to a product that popped into. So my all of my training happened in tobacco control. So I've been a tobacco control researcher since I was started graduate school in 2012 or something like that. And right around that time, e-cigarettes were just starting to pop into the marketplace. And they occupied a similar space to Delta-8 THC, in under the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, they were not considered tobacco products at the time. And the manufacturers made that argument and said, we don't have to pay taxes. We don't have to put the Surgeon General's warning label on it. Some of them argue we don't even need to have the restrictions on age limits. So it came into the market as essentially an unregulated product, and all the regulation had to catch up to try to contain that market. And what we ended up seeing is in 2019, around the same time when Delta-8 came out, it was about a quarter of the U.S. youth had tried a vaping product. So my interests are in those type of products
Okay.
where a manufacturer is looking at the legal frameworks that we set up for, in this case, cannabis, but there are other products that push the limits of the legal limits of other regulations too, like e-cigarettes. Another one is lots of other people are pushing it with mushroom products, is finding, and also opioid laws, and kratom laws. So
Mhm.
my interests generally are in those type of products and to figure out what's an appropriate regulation, how are manufacturers selling them, where their use is going up. So just generally interested in, I guess you could call them new psychoactive substances.
Right. Well, and if I recall, some of your work with tobacco involved really checking out whether retailers were actually adhering to the law, let's say age limits and things like that, right? Tell us how you did that, and then you'd have some thoughts about how this might even apply to marijuana dispensaries, right?
Yeah, sure. So in my lab, we have a whole system that we use to study e-commerce retailers, and we're focused right now mainly on tobacco retailers. And a lot of our regulation for the sale of tobacco is enforced among retailers. So we have retail licensing, and those licensees are expected to follow certain regulations. One of them is paying their taxes, another is not selling it to kids. And so to check compliance among those retailers, we recruit buyers throughout the state of California. Currently, we're hoping to expand to the country in a bit. But basically, what we do is we can look on their webpage for some indications of compliance. So one of them, if for tobacco, is in the state of California, a retailer can't sell flavored products. So if we see on their website that they're selling a flavored product, it's a potential compliance issue if they're selling it to someone living in California. So to confirm that there is a compliance issue, we buy a product from the retailer and try to have it delivered to an address in California. So if we were able to get a product, that's a compliance issue to the flavor restriction, but then we can also check it compliance issues for age verification.
Mhm.
The driver swipe an ID when they delivered the product as an indication of that. From the actual product, we can also check other compliance issues, like there's a federal law requiring that you can't ship tobacco through the United States Postal Service. And from the receipts, we can check if they paid their taxes and things like that.
Yeah.
So there's a market in California for delivery sales of cannabis. So we have thoughts of extending the system over there, but there's lots of issues that we've run into with cannabis being a controlled substance.
Right.
As many people have bumped into handling issues with cannabis, we also, even though we have a market where any adult in the state could buy these products legally through our adult use system, we can't research it to check if those retailers are complying with the laws because we can't handle it at the University of California without a DEA license, which would not be extended to a compliance check protocol. That's what we found.
Yeah.
But maybe possible with Delta-8 if
So
it's considered hemp.
actually, this dovetails nicely into kind of a final question I wanted to ask you, which is looping back to if you could redesign state and federal policy, what would you do as it relates to these products? Because just if I may say, what you're alluding to in your previous comments is that universities cannot really research these things. We can't go to a dispensary or send somebody there and buy stuff and then check it out because federal law prohibits that. And universities have to abide by federal law, even though state law may be permissive.
So just to clarify, are you asking about what should we do with Delta-8 or what should we do with Delta-9
Delta
in
8.
terms of, okay.
Let's come back to Delta-8 because, well, this has been the focus. Do you see, I mean, if you were king, and were able to harmonize federal and state laws, what would you do with Delta-8?
Well, it's interesting. I had a conversation with a university lawyer about cannabis, as you know, and this lawyer said it may be possible to order Delta-8 under federal law. It wouldn't be possible under state law, but under federal law. So say if I happen to be at IU instead of UCSD, under federal law and under state law, it would be permissible for me to run my program, my compliance check program in the state of Indiana. It wouldn't be here. I'm not saying that they told me to do this or that they would encourage it per se, but there is a legal space to potentially do research on Delta-8 if it is considered hemp, which it's debatable whether it is under federal law. The DEA has not officially considered it an analog to Delta-9, for example, which would make it illegal under federal law. So
What
I
would you
don't
say,
think
though?
I'm
I
getting
mean,
at the heart of your question, though.
Well, I just didn't know, given your interest in the regulation and compliance and so forth, is there something that would be more rational for our country than what exists at the moment? But
Yeah,
maybe
I
there isn't.
think I think there's a lot to unpack there. I guess how about I say specifically what should we do right now with Delta-8?
Sure.
And I think ultimately I would say it's up to the Commonwealth to decide how we regulate these things. But in the current climate, say for California, the Commonwealth of California has decided that they want recreational cannabis use. I think given the reasons that we talked about today, it doesn't make sense to allow a product that's essentially the same as Delta-9, although it's just produced by a chemical reaction and not the natural product. It doesn't make sense to allow a market for that product to be sold in a system outside of the system that we promised. to uphold. So there might be a time in which it could be sold in our regulatory system for adult use marijuana if it could be proved to have like a standardized process that's considered safe and it's regulated as marijuana is regulated. It might fulfill some of those demands that we were talking about earlier. Of consumers might want it because it's a milder high, and manufacturers might like it because it's cheaper
Mhm.
to manufacture and produce than extracting Delta-9 to have an isolate, for example.
Right.
So to me, it makes a lot of sense to consider it to be the same as marijuana because it's not so different. Whether or not marijuana should be sold and regulated in the way it is, that's a debatable subject too, but I think it's a separate subject.
Right. More to the question, I guess, becomes, so long as there is this disconnect between state and federal regulations, it sounds like there's no really good way to solve this issue. Because on the one hand, it seems strange that just because there's a geographic boundary, a particular molecule is banned in one state and is permitted in another. From a medical standpoint, it doesn't make sense, right? But it only makes sense because we have this patchwork kind of,
I guess to say one last thing, I don't see it as so different. I agree. It doesn't make a lot of sense, the patchwork system, but it makes even less sense to treat this as something other than what's being sold
Right,
in that patchwork
right,
system.
right, right.
So the most common sense to me would be to treat it as if it were that, even if it limits where it can be sold in many cases.
Yeah. Well, very good. Anything else that you might want to add? I feel this has been a very interesting conversation about a somewhat unsolvable issue, but there we are.
Yeah, I guess the only point we haven't discussed is Delta-8 isn't the only molecule on the market that's being sold this way, and there's others that have different psychotropic or pharmacological profiles, and some of those carry different risks
Yeah.
and potential benefits as well. So it would be good and wise probably to anticipate those in deciding um, regulatory outcomes. Some of those are plant-based too. THCA is another one that we haven't talked about, but is actual cannabis flower. But some manufacturers have made the argument that it's hemp, even though it produces Delta-9 THC as soon as you light it up. So there's lots of other products on this market. Some of them are not synthetic at all, and some of them are very synthetic. And so whatever is decided should anticipate these other ones as well.
Well, now you've teased us a little bit about these other things. Would you like to say more about, I know there are many, many examples, and we probably don't have time to go to each one.
Sure.
But are there one or two that you would want to mention as very topical?
Sure. One that I already mentioned, so THCA is a precursor chemical to Delta-9 THC.
And A stands for acetate, I take it?
Yeah, hexahydrocannabolic acid, I think, if I could try. Yeah, so it's how products are being sold with that are essentially cannabis products. It's just the flower is cut before it begins to express Delta-9 THC. So manufacturers have argued that since it's THCA and not Delta-9 THC, it's also could be sold as hemp for the kind of a similar argument they're making to Delta-8. And so for example, like I was in North Carolina last year, and there's a bunch of dispensaries in the state that are selling joints and flower, and all of them claim to be THCA flower and not Delta-9 or like marijuana flower, to use the legal term. So there's that market. So that's one. And but as soon as you light those flowers up, it pyrolyzes the THCA to Delta-9 THC and other THCs. So there might be an argument that well, why are we considering this to be something other than marijuana? So there's questions there and the research to be done by people smarter than me. And then so that would be like a totally natural organic product that's sold.
Yeah.
But then there's all sorts of products that do not exist in cannabis at all. So one example of that is something called HHC, or hexahydrocannabinol. It does not naturally occur at all, but is made through a similar conversion method as Delta-8, and just adding on other components to the THC molecule. It's thought to be more potent than Delta-9 THC, so it's potentially increasing risk or increasing abuse liability. And there's again not many clinical studies on that. So maybe I'll stop there. Those are two, but I call it the alphabet soup.
Yeah.
And all of the different cannabinoid products.
And you can add different numbers after delta, probably.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that raises the question. I mean, the THCA is kind of interesting because it's actually using the flower, as you say, before it gets there. But then by lighting it up, you convert it to what you want.
Yeah. You do your analysis as well.
Yeah.
If you if you do it right when you cut it, it might have certain chemicals after you let it sit out for a while. The oxidization of it can eventually convert the THCA to Delta-9 anyway.
Yeah, right.
So there's issues with to do the weighing as well for the regulatory standards.
Well, to coin a phrase, we've really gotten into the weeds here. Sorry about that. Anything else, Eric, that you think might be good as a wrap up?
I think I know this podcast is mostly focused on cannabis, but there's a lot of other interesting products in this marketplace too, including other natural products. Like we're seeing lots of like clone or magic mushrooms that claim to give a psychoactive experience. Some of them contain natural psychotropic mushrooms, so not psilocybin, but there's another psychoactive mushroom called Amanita muscaria. It's psychotropic, but in a different way from psilocybin. But then there's lots of other mushrooms that are just completely chemically produced, and some of them have analogs of psilocybin in them, and manufacturers also claiming they can sell them legally. Another one that the FDA announced or maybe it was the DEA announced they're considering banning this summer is a product called 7-hydroxymetrogene, or 7-O. That's a metabolite produced in kratom. So it's an alkaloid in kratom or kratom. It's just normally at a small amount, but manufacturers are doing similar things that they've done with Delta-8, where they're isolating that and increasing the amount of that alkaloid. That alkaloid has very pronounced opioid-like effects, and some pharmacological studies have shown it's substantially more potent than morphine. But you have a manufacturer that's claiming they can sell it completely legally in most places, and kind of pushing the limits. Ostensibly a natural product, right? And so pushing the limits. So there's lots of others.
Yes.
Is the point.
I have enough trouble wrapping my head around cannabis, so this is a whole other area that's worthy of discussion, and maybe another podcast for that matter. Yeah. Well, look, I want to thank you, Eric. I'm thanking Dr. Eric Leas, who is from the School of Public Health, the Wertheim School of Public Health at UC San Diego, and we've been having a discussion of Delta-8 THC and some issues extending from that. And I very much appreciate your joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
If you like this podcast, please subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. For more information on the Center for Medicinal Cannabis Research at UC San Diego, please find us on social media at CMCR_UCSD on Twitter or X, Instagram, and other social media platforms. or visit our website at cmcr.ucsd.edu. Thanks for listening.